From consideration for poor George Langhorne's feelings, he has always preferred not to act professionally for his personal friends, even though he lost money in consequence. "How does George Langhorne come in?" I ventured to ask. "He is Stretchley's, to all intents and purposes. It's a small family company. The business was founded by George's maternal grandfather and carried to greatness by his mother's brother, Fred Stretchley, whom I used to see at Brighton years ago. Fred made it into a company, but of course kept the bulk of the shares to himself, besides the entire control, and when he died he left all he had to George, on condition, mark you, on condition, that George remained in the business and in active control of it. He did that because he knew that George hated it, and at the same time had a wonderful turn for it." "Rather odd, that," the new member observed. "I don't think so, sir," said the Colonel. "He had a knack for it because it was in his blood, and he hated it because he'd had it crammed down his throat all his life. He'd been right through the mill from a boy. The only holiday he'd ever had from it was a year at Bonn, and that was to learn German with a view to business. It was at Bonn that I became acquainted with him, and a very nice fellow he was, quite a gentleman and extremely well informed. We became great friends. His only fault was his exaggerated dislike of his own occupation. On that subject he was morbid, and I'm afraid I must say a trifle snobbish. All the same, he was unmistakably proud of Stretchley's. He was quite alive to the fact that, if he had to be a tailor, it was a fine thing to be Stretchley's, and in moments of confidence he would thank heaven that he hadn't been born in the ready-made line. Reach-me-downs, he called it. "It might have been worse," he would say manfully. At those times I felt a great respect for him. "They do know how to make a pair of breeches," murmured the new member, regarding his own legs with pensive satisfaction. "Nobody better, nobody better," the Colonel agreed with a solemn cordiality, and we all looked at the new member's legs for some moments. "Well, as I was saying," the Colonel then resumed, "George Langhorne and I became real friends, but I was abroad on service for 2 or 3 years after he came back from Bonn and got into harness in Savile Row, and so I lost sight of him for a bit. But after I'd been home a few months, I was passing through town on my way to the Riviera on 6 weeks' leave, and I dropped in at his place and saw him. I found him in a sad way, very depressed and down in the mouth, railing against the business, utterly sick of it. He told me he couldn't endure the sight of a frock coat and spent all his time at home in pyjamas and a dressing gown, just because those were portions of apparel not supplied by Stretchley's. Morbid, of course, but sad, very sad. It looked to me as if he were on the verge of a breakdown, and I took a strong line with him. I told him that he owed it to himself to take a complete holiday, to get right away from the shop for a bit, to forget all about it, to put plenty of money in his pocket and give himself a real holiday. He told me he hadn't taken more than a week here and there for 2 years. I said, I'm just off to Monte Carlo. You come with me, sink the shop, dismiss it from your mind, and come along. Well, he saw how wise I was, made his arrangements, and joined me at Charing Cross 3 days later. Off we went, and a very good time we had of it. George was a handsome young fellow of 4 or 25, with lots to say for himself, and a very taking way with women. Nobody knew who he was, but I and my friends gave him a good start, and he could take care of the rest for himself. In point of fact, I received a great many compliments on the good taste I showed in choosing my travelling companion. Ah, yes, we had very good fun. The Colonel leant back in his chair for a moment, with a smile of pleasant, possibly of roguish reminiscence. "No signs of the tragedy yet, Colonel," said I. "Wait a bit, I'm just coming to it." When we'd been there about a fortnight, a young lady appeared on the scene. She was one of the prettiest creatures I ever saw, and I've seen some in my day, and as merry as she was pretty. Besides that, she was evidently uncommonly well off. She travelled with a companion, a maid, and a toy poodle, and threw away her money at the tables as if she were made of it. I needn't tell you that such a girl didn't want for